It was June 1st, 1967, when the Beatles released the album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to the public. But unfortunately, the cover album expressed the death of Paul McCartney, the beloved bass player. The Beatles produced a lot of content around the mid-1960s that proved the death of Paul McCartney. The conspiracy theory of the album, Sgt. Pepper's album, from the long gap of not attending live concerts after the theory, and the music gave all the evidence to lead to Paul's death. The conspiracy theory was conducted by the fans, but the Beatles brought out the evidence for the fans to cipher out in order to come up with the conclusion of Paul McCartney's tragic death. So the album began the digging and coming up with theories for the death of Paul McCartney. The album filled with conspiracy theories, so the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album was available to the public on June 1st, 1967. But in 1966 is when the theory began to grow. It all began when fans started to dissect songs, album covers, and especially the drugs they were on when uncovering the evidence of Paul McCartney's death. That also helped make a wide variety of hypothesis of the situation. So the album suggests they are at a burial with everyone that has supported them or have motivated the Beatles to pursue their dreams, as if it was some kind of funeral for Paul McCartney. If looking at the album, in the center is a drum saying the name of the album. But if you place a mirror in the middle of it and reflect the top half of the drum, it shows a message and is encoded saying, I won, IX, he die. And to interpret that, it says on November 9th he died. Now to find out who really died on November 9th, you can take a closer look at the band members. Paul McCartney is looking forward with a black coranglis representing death, and the others are turned toward him as a support. And to top it off, a priest actually holds his hand like this over Paul's head, as if he was blessing him before being laid to rest. Now, the evidence shows he died, but how? Well, diving further into it, the mystery, you can find actually a Rolling Stones on the bottom right side of the cover album. And the model, and there's a car on the doll's leg showing the model of an Aston Martin, which is supposedly the car Paul had the fatal accident in. It shows with red interior inside, showing like the bloody accident, and Paul McCartney drove with a glove, which was on the other side of the leg, and it was covered in blood. Also on the inside of the cover band, they are sitting down in uniform, and the arm of Paul reads a badge saying OPP, but in his angle so it says OPD, which means officially pronounced dead. And to top it off, the band members are all looking forward on the back of the album, but Paul McCartney is facing backward, showing his head, the back of his head to the people who are viewing the album. So the cover of the album suggests plenty of evidence, but that wasn't enough for fans, so they dug into the music of the Beatles. So the music from the Beatles have portrayed evidence of the actual death of Paul McCartney, and stating that he has died. Some play the music backwards to bring more meaning into the suggested meaning, some hold secret messages, and it might as well hold the death of Paul McCartney. So one of the songs, actually from Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, was known as A Day in the Life. John Lennon sings how Paul blew his mind out in a car, suggesting from the car crash Paul was killed in. And then the lyrics changed to that he hadn't noticed that the lights had changed, saying that Paul didn't know he had died. He actually probably was killed on impact. And so after that explanation of the wreck, it continues to sing about how a crowd of people stood and stared. They'd seen his face before. Nobody was really sure if it was from the House of Lords. All these lyrics lead to one thing, that he died on impact, and people came to see what happened, saw it was Paul, and talked of the House of Lords, suggesting maybe that he went to heaven. Some people take songs and they replay them over and over again to try to get a meaning out of it. And according to Joel Glazer, he is a retired teacher and an original Beatles fan. And he has actually uncovered, toward the end of the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, you can hear a voice shouting, stating this: Paul is dead. Yeah, really, really dead. And if you look that up, you can actually find out that it really does. You have to listen closely though. But after analyzing the cover albums and lyrics, fans waited to see what was to come from the Beatles, because if it was true, then how can they continue as the Beatles if Paul was dead? But after the release of the Sgt. Pepper's album, the Beatles didn't perform live for about 3 years. Now, this gap of not performing live only strengthened the theory of Paul's death, creating this sense of mystery because there was no news of Paul being killed in a car crash, only the conspiracy theory that people brought up throughout the cover album and music they played. So within this gap, it allowed people to come up with more plausible answers to what really is happening with the Beatles. Some of the lyrics propose that Paul was replaced by William Campbell, aka Billy Shears. The lyrics say, "With a little help from my friends, lend me your ears, and I'll sing you a song, and I'll try not to sing out of key." And Paul McCartney was a great singer, so this kind of conveys that Billy Shears was the one singing it, and he was still working on perfecting his voice. 3 years to be precise. But in 1969, the 30th of January, at the Apple Records headquarters rooftop in London, England, the Beatles performed with all the band members alive and kicking. Still, with the live performance, who's to say that it was Paul McCartney? It could have been the lookalike Billy Shears. He did look very similar. And he did have 3 years of practice. The theory brings up a lot of possibilities whether Paul is alive or if Billy Shears has taken the role of Paul McCartney. With everything uncovered, there still isn't a way to be sure if it is just a theory. The conspiracy theory of Paul McCartney's death is a mystery. Diving into the answers from the cover album to the songs and lyrics only creates more questions that can't be answered. Only the Beatles know the truth, whether Paul lived or died, but the lyrics and the album suggest that Paul McCartney has died. The album, published on June 1st, 1966, produced a conspiracy theory that grabbed every fan to believe that Paul McCartney was killed in a car crash. Was it real? Is Paul dead? We may never know, but that's what the theory shows.